Hi, I'm Connie.
And I'm Connie.
And we are
Bad News Travels Fast.
Well, today we are talking about listening.
The listening aspect of communication.
Yes.
So last week we talked about the different types, and so I'll review them just to give you guys a recap. We talked about verbal communication. We talked about nonverbal communication. We talked about written communication. And so there's two more types that we're going to talk about, and today we're going to talk about listening. So what does it mean to listen, Connie?
Well, to listen, the definition of listen means to give one's attention to sound. So whatever it is, you're listening to it, I would assume, with your ears.
Yeah.
Take notice of and act on what someone says. Respond to advice or request. That's also listening.
Okay.
Excuse me. So if I tell you to do something, you actually do it, you listened.
Yes. So that means that there's a difference between hearing and listening.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there's listen with your ears, and there's also listen with your actions. Mm-hmm. Make an effort to hear something. Be alert and ready to hear something. They listen for sounds from the baby's room.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
What's going on with you now?
I know, right? I hate that when your saliva just goes down the wrong pipe. Okay. Use to urge someone to pay attention to what one is going to say. Hey, listen, I've got an idea. So it's like you're getting someone ready to listen to what you are about to say. Okay. So those were the definitions that I looked up. But also, one of the things I also looked up was what great listeners do.
Okay.
And they came down with three things. Not talking when others are speaking. Mm-hmm. Letting others know you're listening through facial expressions and verbal sounds. Like you. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, you just did it. And being able to repeat what others have said practically word for word.
Wow.
Yeah. So sometimes we're listening, but we're half listening.
Yeah.
So like I'm listening, but I'm also thinking of a response to what you just said. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking bits and pieces. So I'm actually not necessarily listening to you 100%. Right. I'm listening to you, and I'm listening to my own thoughts at the same time.
About how I'm going to respond. And also sometimes you're listening to thoughts about other things that you need to do. And when people be like, did you hear what I said? We hit the ones that we said, which is the gist of the conversation.
Yes.
But it's not the entirety of the conversation. And you miss out on things that's being communicated when you only hear bits and pieces. Yes. Because then things don't really make sense. And so it's like, was you really listening?
Right. And I think too, though, one thing they didn't say was eye contact.
Okay.
So I think eye contact is a very good form of listening, but I would say having 5 children and a husband makes me have to be able to listen without looking.
Right.
I need to be able to hear. I would say even having children, like not necessarily a husband, but even when they're little, like it talked about the baby, listening for the baby, you start being in tune to hearing things you didn't hear before.
Right.
Like a cry or someone walking or, you know what I mean? And so I think that I would say for me personally as a parent, I've learned to listen without looking at people. Mm-hmm. So often when I'm talking to someone or they might be talking to me, they'll be like, hey, look at me. I'm forgetting that I need to show them that I'm listening by looking at them.
Right, because it's giving attention to me so that I know that you're listening. Because a lot of time people are doing 5 things. We're in a world of multitaskers. Yes. And I am very much one of them. So I don't have to look at you and I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm typing on my computer. Right. But am I really wholeheartedly listening?
Well, I think I think we're getting into the quality of that moment.
Right.
So you might not feel that it is quality because I'm not looking at you. Mm-hmm. So basically it would more be about the other person, not necessarily your abilities. So I had to learn that, because I have abilities like I can tune everything out
Mm-hmm.
You can be talking over there to that person over there and sitting right next to me, and I heard absolutely nothing you said. And that also goes with having 5 kids, because it's like there'll be so much going on. And so you learn to tune out just to kind of keep your sanity. So I can also do that. But at the same time, I think that being aware, when we're talking about communication and relationships,
right,
you have to be aware of the needs of the other person.
Right, because when we talked about what communication is, it talked about understanding their meaning.
Oh,
so
right.
My
That's what we
meaning
said the last time.
is not just, you're hearing words coming out of my mouth. You're able to respond to give me that is looking at me. Because what happens is sometimes when you're talking, you can tell when someone's distracted.
Oh yeah, of course.
And so they're hearing you, right? I'm hearing the words, the sounds,
right.
But I'm not listening. I'm not hearing your meaning when I'm doing 5 other things,
right?
And so sometimes I'm in a conversation with one of my friends, and I can tell when he's not listening. So I'm like, "Hello," it's like, "Yeah," but I know you texting. You're doing something else,
right?
Because you're not as attentive to me. And so I didn't pause, and it's been like maybe a 10-15 second pause, and it's kind of like I asked a question. Or I know you would infer about what I said or make a comment to what I said, but you're not doing it because you're doing something else.
Right.
Right. And so that's sometimes I think why people want the verbal, the eye contact, the visual.
Right.
Right. Because when you're looking at me, you're looking into my eyes. Now, in the psychology world, I have been taught to listen to what's not being said.
Right.
And that is another level of listening.
Yes,
right.
It is.
So when I'm listening to what's not being said, I'm inferring meaning in what you really mean by the words you're using. Because sometimes people are saying something, but underlying it's bad. Let me give you an example, right? So if I'm doing therapy and I have a parent that comes in and she's like, yeah, Johnny don't do this. He doesn't listen to me. He doesn't do that. He go to school. He acted all crazy. I just don't know what's wrong with him. What she's really is saying is, I didn't raise Johnny this way, and how he's acting is not a good depiction of how I raised him.
Right.
But she said none of that out her mouth.
Right. Right.
That's not what she communicated.
All she talked about was his behavior.
Right. Everything he did wrong. Everything he's not doing.
Right.
But that's really how you feel, because this is reflective of me, and you don't want people to think that I'm a bad parent.
Right.
Or that I haven't trained you. I haven't given, you didn't learn manners from home. So really, what you're communicating is not really the issue. Now, the issue may be Johnny's behavior, but what you're talking about right now is how,
yourself.
Right. How you're making me appear to others.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Yes, and that's the problem.
It may not be Johnny behave as much. That's the problem. So you tone it down.
You're making me look bad.
Yes. You're making me look like I didn't teach you anything. You didn't have any home training.
Right. And that's 100%. Because I've had a troubled child at some time, and there will be people who will encourage you, like, oh, he's just going through some growing pains, or he's just trying to come into himself or be a man. But then you'll have others like, what are you teaching him at the house?
Right.
It's like an automatic.
It's a judgment.
It is a judgment. I do think, though, when you have a troubled child, I'm saying troubled, like as far as
that mean, but
my meaning for troubled child would mean he's being, things are being disruptive everywhere he goes.
Okay.
So if I say troubled child, that means things are disrupted at school. He might not be getting good grades, or may not get along with the students, or get along with the teacher, or something like that.
Okay.
There's a disruption.
Okay.
Goes to church. There's a disruption.
Okay.
Not getting along with the class, or whatever. Doesn't like going. I don't know. Like a disruption. Then you come home and there's another disruption.
Okay.
Because now, as the parents, we have to discipline. And if that disruption is happening, on a consistent basis, you've got problems. Okay. You know what I mean? But I do believe 100% that it does stem from home. So I am one of them, you know what I mean, that thinks that there's probably a deeper underlying issue, and we need to get to it.
Absolutely.
It's not just that your child wants to act out.
Right.
So I think at that moment, as a parent, I have to find some listening skills instead of some "you gonna do what I say" skills.
Yeah.
Because that's usually how we are. We're like, look, you gonna do what I say. I ain't raised you to be like that. And then for you to go to church and act up,
right,
in front of the church folk.
Because we're concerned with
how we're gonna look,
how we're gonna be perceived.
What have I done to make you be this way, or what am I not doing right? I remember a teacher asking me, "Do I discipline my son?" Mm-hmm. I'm like, boy, if you knew how much discipline, you'd be calling the peoples on me, getting whoopings like every day.
Oh, you was abusing them.
Right? No, I mean, it started to be borderline abuse. It was like whoopings every day for something.
Because you can't beat them every day. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And the Holy Spirit was like, stop beating him.
Thank the Lord.
Yes. And I was like, okay. Like,
because it still wasn't working.
You have to do something else. You have to find out what the problem is.
And I think that's a deeper level of listening, because I remember a girl that I traveled overseas with, and she had a period when she was acting out, and her parents were like, what's going on? And she said it was very clear. I was telling you that I needed help, and you weren't listening.
Right.
And it's like, you never said anything. My behavior was talking.
Oh my gosh.
Woo! My behavior was saying something's wrong, and nobody was paying attention.
Wait, but that's visual listening.
Yes.
Okay, so when you see something happening, even when we watch TV, let's talk about politically, right? Mm-hmm. We're seeing what's going on in the news about COVID and about our president and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. When the news people come on, they're saying things to get us to react emotionally. Mm-hmm.
That's what the commercials are about.
It's not that they're just saying things. It's also their mannerisms and their attitude coming forth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So if they feel judgmental towards, let's say judgmental towards our president because he's making some bad decisions.
Right.
They're not going to be just their regular, hey, President Trump said and did blah, blah, blah. No, it's like, he did blah, blah, blah. I can't believe he did that. This is what's happening in the news now, right? Mm-hmm. So even their actions is giving us what we are supposed to be experiencing at that moment.
There's two types of communication going out, and we're listening we're listening to the emotion, and we're listening to the body language, so to speak.
Yes.
And that's how in psychology we can hear what's not being said.
And to their words.
Yes.
So it's like three.
Right. Listening. And so that's how you do that in psychology. That is why I have to look at you, because your nonverbal's communicating, your verbal's communicating, and your body and your posture is all communicating. So facial expressions are communicating.
Yes.
What you're saying is another form of communication.
Right.
So I have to listen with all three to get the whole entire meaning of what you're talking about. And that's why talking on the phone can be challenging.
Yeah, or texting.
Right, or written communication can be challenging because I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm trying to get your meaning. And when you're not giving me the actual meaning. One, because you don't want to, you're afraid. Or two, you don't really know the actual meaning.
Right.
So I am trying to listen for your meaning. Right. And that's why I think the thing that you read, it talked about being able to repeat it word for word. Now, in psychology, we're not repeating word. We're saying it in different words because I'm trying to make sure that what I heard is correct, but what you said is what you're really trying to convey to me.
Right.
Because sometimes it's not. And so if I repeat it back the same way, it's just your words. It's like I'm a rabbit just repeating back something. Right. But when I can use different words and communicate the same thing, it's demonstration. It's demonstrative that I am listening.
Yeah. And okay, so I'm going to say another thing too, like, I was talking to someone, this just happened yesterday, and they, as we were conversating back and forth, mm-hmm. they were like, well, what do you mean by that? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't mean anything. I'm just asking, you said this.
Right.
So now I'm asking a question based off of what you said. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm in there with you right now. I have no underlying meaning. It's just straightforward. Is this? Mm-hmm. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, because
I think a lot of times we may have meaning. We may have a deeper meaning. We may not. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And sometimes we're listening for something deeper. Or if you have a tendency to talk to people who are manipulative, or if you are manipulative, there's always a motive mm-hmm. in the conversation.
Right.
So I could be asking you something that I'm going to ask you 3 questions to actually get to where I really am trying to go.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
When I could have just asked you that 3rd question
the first
and
time.
got the answer the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're oftentimes dealing with, I would say, manipulative conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's always like this, oh, well, what do you mean? Because there's an underlying something there, possibly,
Mm-hmm.
that now I need to know what that is.
Right, because we're listening without experiences.
Right.
We're not listening to what you're just saying in the moment. I'm listening through my experience.
Yes.
And that's how people answer questions wrong. Right? Like we talked about last week. I was talking to someone, and when they were watching us, and he was like, I'm the person that you say, hey, what color is your shirt? Oh, I forgot to do this and that. Because what she told me was, I'm thinking in my mind, she knows what color my shirt is. So she's not really asking about my shirt. She's asking why I didn't wear what I said I was going to wear.
Right, but she never asked that.
Correct.
Right.
So that's the problem is we have to listen to the question, even if we think that they are asking really this other question, which probably was what she was really asking, because, in the scenario.
But that's also where offense comes in, and the communication can go awry really quickly. Mm-hmm. If the real question, the real answer to the question is not answered.
Right. It gets frustrating.
Yeah. And so if I ask you a question and you answer me with a question, we now have to go in some sort of circle because you didn't answer my question.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So you're listening to the fact that you didn't answer the question. And so now you're responding to them not listening, but you're also responding to their statement.
Right.
So there's so many layers to this listening. That is crazy. Let me read something to you, though.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Okay, so the act of listening does not often make its way onto the list of types of communication. Active listening, however, is perhaps one of the most important types of communication because if we cannot listen to the person sitting across from us, we cannot effectively engage with them. Think about a negotiation. Part of the process is to assess what the opposition wants and needs. Without listening, it is impossible to assess that, which makes it difficult to achieve a win-win outcome. The most important part.
Wow.
Not what we say, not our verbal,
right?
Not our facial, not our posture. Listening.
Yes. I think too that when someone is not a good listener, they can fake listen.
Okay, tell me what fake listening is.
So I think that the responses. Okay, so you're talking to me and I'm saying, okay, yeah. And I start asking questions, right? I'll start asking questions based off of a word you said to pretend like I'm listening per se. But I really I'm not listening. Like if we finished and you were like, what did we just talk about? You might not know. And so you can have that as well, like where someone is artistic in conversation, meaning they're able to be savvy. Like they might not have heard nothing you said, but they heard one word to be able to ask you a question and make it look like they're actually
or they heard one word so they formulated what you could have talked about. And it might be similar because they know you and they kind of have an idea about you, but they haven't listened to what you said.
Right.
And sometimes we're listening and we don't I don't care. So we roll in our eyes and stuff like that. And so now we're hearing you, but it's like, all right, when you be quiet.
And usually you'll find out later if they were actually listening because it's going to come up again.
It was. Remember I told you?
Remember? And I'll be like, no.
You wasn't listening to me.
Right.
Because you know that happened in relationships. We tell the dudes, like, you don't listen to nothing I said.
Right.
Look, I did hear you. You said this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But I said 50 other things.
Right.
And you find out later, and then that hurts the relationship. Because now, why am I going to talk to you if you're not going to listen?
Yeah. And I would say, especially if that's something important. You know what I mean? Because I know we can get forgetful, and there's like a lot going on in these brains.
It is.
So sometimes we're like, no, I don't remember. But at the same time, I think that listening is probably your most important form of communication above all of them because it really will cut out arguments if you're actually listening. If you're actually listening, it will restore relationships. If you're listening to someone say that they are hurting,
right,
instead of, I think there are moments where we have to decide which part we're going to listen to that's the most important.
Okay.
So for instance, if I come to you and I say, you know, you hurt me when you said, oh no, I'm trying to think of an example. You hurt me when you said I look fat. I'm just gonna use that. I don't know. Okay. And you like, girl, you know you fat. Like, that sounds bad, but you say you fat all the time. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, but I don't want anyone else to say that I'm fat. Like, I'm okay saying I'm fat because I'm struggling with it, but I'm not okay with someone else saying I'm fat. Now, you might think that's crazy, right?
You think everything's crazy?
No, I'm just saying, you might think that's crazy that I'm saying that. Like, I'm okay with myself saying something. I'm not okay with you saying something, even if it's true.
Right, because really, if I'm listening to that statement, I'm saying that I'm fat, so you don't say it. I'm bringing it up, so there's no need for you to say it.
Right.
I'm letting you know.
So I am using a form of protection to protect myself by me saying that I'm fat every 5 minutes or every time we're in a conversation or whatever. And when you say it, it builds on my insecurity.
Yeah, it confirms what you already think about yourself.
Right. But you can automatically dismiss what I just said. Yeah. And not think about me having an insecurity or anything like that. You just like, girl, you say you fat all the time. I'm going to say you fat too. And walk away.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to agree with you because that's what you believe.
Right.
Which might not be effective listening. And so, but then that's my thing is when you're really listening to somebody, like I said, you are saying that because you don't want nobody else to say it. So you're trying to protect yourself. So now when you're listening, if you listen, you'll have the appropriate response.
Right.
And really meaning, I think, in healing and understanding can come from a conversation when people are actively listening. Yeah. Because if you say that to me, hey, you know, I'm fat or something like that, and you say it often, now because I'm listening, I'm like, it seems like you say it because you want to protect yourself and you don't want anybody else to say it. Like, you know, what are you getting? What's the benefit of telling everyone that you're fat every time we have a conversation?
Right.
Now we can start getting to the hidden meaning behind that. It's the insecurity, this and that. Somebody says it and it hurt my feelings. And so now because when we're communicating, I'm trying to understand your meaning.
Right.
I can't understand your meaning if I'm not listening because I have to listen to the other things too. Like, hey, you know, and then you have to, when you're listening, you bring things to people's attention that they didn't even know. Like, do you know you always say that when I say this?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I hadn't thought that. Like, I did a training one time and it was giving us feedback, like how it was. And it was like, oh, you know, Connie was really, really good, but you say a lot. I'm like, do I?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you need a filler. You're thinking and you like, I need to say something. So is like a filler there.
It fills the space.
Yes. Yeah. And it fills the silence when you're not comfortable with silence, which is another act of listening.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
And I think people are uncomfortable with silence. Even when I'm teaching my students, I'm like, you need to get comfortable with silence because I feel like silence speaks louder than words.
Right.
So your silence is saying a lot to me. It can say that you don't have anything to say. It can say that you're thinking. It can say that you're mad. Right. You're communicating by saying nothing.
Right.
And so now your nonverbals and your visual communication that we haven't talked about is on display. And people say the body doesn't lie. So we can smile, right? But you moving around, you antsy, that smile is fake.
Yeah. You know, it was funny because I was telling the kids that I had gone on a trip with a friend. This is many years ago. Mm-hmm. But it was like a 6-hour drive or whatever. And my friend talked the whole time.
You like, wanted to talk?
Never stopped talking for the whole 6 hours, you know, and I am someone who, I'm okay. We could be driving for a whole hour and I'm okay with silence. And for somebody else, they would think something was wrong, that I'm not talking for that hour. But for me, I would just be resting.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, not talking is rest.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that we also have to know the people that we are communicating with, like their lifestyle, or, somebody talks for a living. They want to come home and not talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily good for a spouse or
Yeah.
good for a child,
Right.
or, you know what I mean? So you have to have balance with that. But I think a lot of times we are offended by how someone communicates because they're not communicating the way we would.
Right. Or the way we want them to.
Right.
Right.
Instead of understanding that there are different forms of communication, and I need to just let you know, this is the one I like the best.
Or even letting them know in a car ride, like, hey, it's been, on this ride, because I think it's worse for me to let you talk for 6 hours knowing I don't want to listen,
right,
pretending like I'm listening.
Well, on that trip, I was shocked. Oh. So it wasn't like one of those moments where I wasn't listening no more. It was like after so many hours, I looked at the time and I was like, wow, they can really go. It was like at the 4th hour. I'm like, wow, they really can talk. And then I'm like, okay, we took a break. We get back in the car and they started talking again. And on that trip, I was amazed.
Okay.
I was like, who does that? Like I couldn't even understand, right, that somebody could go that long. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just talking. And so when we were coming back, I was like, wow, I thought about, while we were on the trip, I thought about going back. I need to have some thoughts to myself so that I can, reorganize getting back home. Because I have to go home and I have all these responsibilities now. So now I have to get myself together for that. I'm going to need some quiet just to focus. Mm-hmm. So I just ended up, there was a few people with us. So I just ended up sitting in the back seat.
Okay. So you can tune her out.
Kinda.
Yeah, you can tune her out.
Yeah, I mean,
it sounds bad, but that's what you did.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Yeah,
but I really needed some personal time.
Right, but we have to communicate that because people are not aware of cues. Right, you know how somebody comes in the room,
and you don't want to just give people cues without. Sometimes they don't know what that.
They don't. But people come in the room, you're doing something, you're reading, and they're like, hey, I just want to say hey, and they start talking. You're like, oh, okay. You look up, you look for a little while, okay, you look back down, and let me finish. They're still going.
Right.
But you see that I'm doing something.
Right.
But what for that person, you need to get off and get off whatever's off your chest and say something. And so you have to do that. Sometimes when there's certain things I don't want to hear in a particular season, I'll be like, hey, I don't want to listen to that right now. Whatever's coming out your mouth, if it's gossip, if it's not gossip, or if it's the same situation we keep talking about over and over again, like, hey, right now, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Can we talk about something else? Instead of me just tuning you out, because that's normally what I'm going to do.
Right.
And I think we have to also be comfortable with silence and pay attention to things. And I think that's why looking at somebody is important when you're getting off, when I'm getting off everything, because I'm always communicating every day. I communicate with what I wear.
Right.
What I wear says something about me. What I listen to is communicating something about me.
Yeah.
What I drive is communicating something about me. Where I live, the type of house, how it's decorated, all of that is communicating something about me. Yeah. And that's a little bit more visual communication. Right. But I'm always communicating. My silence and my eye contact is communicating. And eye contact and attentiveness and not looking at your watch, not looking at your phone is saying, I'm here with you in the moment, trying to understand your meaning. Yes. And my listening is attentive, because attentive listening is just listening, because I could be looking away and I'm listening to you. Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying, but I am doing something else. So you're not actively listening.
Right.
In order to actively listen, they said don't cut people off. You need to be silent.
Yeah. Right.
And wait. And sometimes when you're silent, you can hear all the other things. You can hear the concern. You can hear the hurt. You can hear that. To make communication meaningful, I hear people often say, I just don't like to just talk about nothing.
Right.
Are they talking about nothing? Are we not listening enough to get to what the real meaning is? And sometimes people don't want to just come out and say it because they have their own preconceived notion about how you're going to feel and what you're going to think about what I'm communicating.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to tell me what I don't want you to consider what you think how I think I'm going to respond.
Right.
Like, just give it to me so I can listen and get through it.
Yeah, I had a mentee, and I remember saying to, she would call and talk for like 15, 20 minutes about what I would say to be like nothing, like how her day was or week or, blah, blah, blah. And then I would say, oh, okay, well, I got to go because I might be at work or I might be doing something with kids or whatever the case. And she would be like, oh, well, the reason I called.
Oh, it hasn't come out yet?
Right, it wouldn't come out yet. And so she would say basically like her thoughts is like I'm warming you up to get you to the real communication and the reason. And so I just said to her, well, what I need you to do, because I'm so busy, is I need you to get on and give me that first. And then if I have time, then I can listen to how your week was and how you feel about this and how you want this and want that. You know what I'm saying? And so, but that was a difficult thing because a lot of times we are raised a certain way. You might have a parent to say, don't just come at me with all of that. Ask me how I'm doing, how my day is. That's not necessarily going to work for this relationship over here.
The experiences or the lack thereof.
Or the lack thereof.
And I have a story too. It happened this week. We talk about communication. So I'm actively like, okay, I learned stuff in this conversation too and talking about it. And so one of my friends called me and they telling me about, a job they're applying for, this and this and this and that. And they got 3 different jobs. They're going over here. I was like, wait. I said, do you have a pen and paper? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, I have one. I said, let's write it down. What are the 4 things that you need in this job? We wrote it down. What are the things out of the list of 4 that you will sacrifice? Got that. Now, tell me about the first job. Tell me about the second job. Tell me about the third job. Okay. Based on what you're saying, it looks like the first and third job is the ones that you would be willing to take and not job 2. Right? And so when we finished that, it was like, oh, that's very helpful. But I had to listen because they didn't call and say, hey, I have 3 jobs I'm thinking about. I need your perspective, or I need help for, to figure out which one I want to take. That wasn't what they said initially. But because I was listening, I was able to help them with what they really needed without them asking. Because sometimes it just doesn't come like that. Or you haven't gathered in your mind what you're really asking. Like you got to tell a few stories to get around to it. And sometimes the other person needs to. But if I wasn't listening, I'm like, okay, look like you got a couple of positions coming up. Which one you want to choose? Well, I don't know. Okay. What do I say to that? Because you don't know.
Right.
I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So that's the awesome part of listening, because you're also helping them to understand the question. And actually, you're trying to get a solution. Most people call with a question, a statement, or they need a solution or your advice on something. And so you have to listen. And then I was saying to him, I was like, oh, well, let me not tell you what I think. And it was like, no, I am asking your opinion. Right? But they didn't call and say, I need your opinion on which job I should take. That wasn't how it happened. But the great thing about listening is now I'm listening to you and you're giving me all this information. I need to write it down if I'm really going to help you. But I'm also helping you to formulate what your real question is. And so now the conversation is meaningful. And both parties, because we talked about a win-win situation or win-win solution. You cannot get that without listening. And so we have to be really cognizant about that. And they was like, oh, I really appreciate it. Like that was, what I needed. I thank you for helping me with that. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that in therapy. And they'll say like, you shrink me. I was like, no, I didn't shrink you. I didn't shrink you. I didn't at all. I was like, but in therapy, I do that because usually we have negative core beliefs that were started in our childhood. So everything we communicate, even how we listen, is coming from this negative core belief. And then when something happens negatively, it confirms the core belief you have. So my thing is like, okay, when I'm listening as a therapist, I'm like, hey, give me some evidence that supports that belief. And but we're writing this down. Now give me some evidence that doesn't support it. And we write it down. So now we have these 2 lists side by side. and you have all these pros, all these cons.
Right.
And you see that the pros or the cons to what you believe are greater than the pros. Now we can restructure your thought process and deal with the real issue is. But sometimes you have to see it on paper.
Right.
So that you could do that. But I have to be listening to go with those things, because sometimes we're just talking and we're just talking. We're not even listening to what we're saying.
Right. Right.
So you're listening to what you're saying yourself, but you're also listening to the other person.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why communication is an art.
Oh my gosh, tell me about it. And then too, I think a lot of times for people who have had like really bad experiences with communication, or they're just they're defensive.
Yes.
So even when they call you for advice, they put a cloak of defense on.
Right.
You know what I mean? To listen to what you are saying. And I remember saying to someone one time, another mentee, every time you ask me for advice, you're defensive against the advice that I'm giving you. I'm not sure I'm understanding what you are hearing. You know what I mean? So help me understand what I just said, how it made you feel. And basically, like, they had an issue with authority, period. So that's why they needed to be mentored. So it's something that sometimes there are things that work against us when we are communicating. And so because of that, those are things that have to be worked out personally.
Yeah, and you have to help them to see that, like you said with your mentee, because I was talking to somebody about the first communication, and it was like, yeah, like sometimes I go to people and I'm asking them a question, but I'm like, yo, no pressure. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. And that annoys me, because I know I don't have to do it.
Right.
But because they're protecting themselves.
They're fearful.
They're fearful, and they're trying to protect themselves. Like, I don't want you to feel like I'm pressuring you. You could say no.
Right.
Right? So my thing is just ask my question and let me determine if I'm going to say no.
Right.
Because I understand that. But that's they're communicating their insecurities and their form of protection that they're trying to look for.
Yeah.
And so it's so hard. And so, because like I said, we listen based on our experiences and how it happened with Jill and John, and you're talking to Sue.
Yeah. You know, one time, you know, I would say too, like, a lot of times, I want to give an example, but, okay, maybe I won't give that example. I'm thinking like,
Just say.
Well, no, okay.
Can you like camouflage a little bit?
I'm trying to figure, I was trying to figure out if I could do that, but I don't think I can. I don't think I necessarily can. I'm sorry on that one. Okay. I started to say something, but I'm like, yeah, no, that's not gonna fly on that. Yeah. No. Okay.
I looked up some things while you were talking. And so there's like little quizzes you can do, of course, like preparing to listen. Right? So it says good preparation is essential for effective listening. Without it, it's hard to listen to people successfully. And so before you have an important conversation, remove anything that may distract you so you can focus and give the other person your full attention. Switch off your cell phone, turn off instant messaging and email alerts. Put your work away. Close your meeting room door. And do what you can to make sure you won't be interrupted.
Right.
If you know that you won't be able to offer the other person your full attention, for example, if you're working on an urgent task, schedule a better time to speak. However, make sure that the other person knows that the conversation is important to you. Also, do what you can to make the other person feel at ease. Use open body language and a friendly tone.
Very good.
If he indicates that he wants to speak about a sensitive subject, and if this is appropriate, remind him that the conversation is confidential. They can be honest with you if you're a manager, stuff like that. And then lastly, I'll say active listening. When you listen actively, you not only make a conscious effort to hear the other person's words, but more importantly, you try to understand their whole message. Okay. So the whole message in that conversation with my friend was, hey, I got a couple jobs. I'm applying for here. I got a couple offers and I don't know which one to take. That was the whole message.
Right.
And once we got through that, it was like, oh, how was your day? Because
I
got what I needed. My needs are met. It's making me think of a book, His and Her Needs, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good book.
You told me to actually listen to it. And so it's like His and Her Needs. And so what happens is somebody's filling the love tank. And sometimes
Right.
it's not you. And if listening is important and you never listen, whoever's
Yeah.
listening is filling my love tank while you're making withdrawals. So we have to be able to listen to their needs.
Oh my gosh!
Consuelo. I know. I'm sorry.
If your love language is quality time, listening is big.
Mhm.
So I know, like, a lot of times people decide what quality time is. You have to literally find out what quality time means to your spouse.
Correct.
Because I could be saying, I mean, you could be thinking we're having quality time because we're sitting next to each other,
Mhm.
but we're both on our phones. You're
Yeah.
on your phone, I'm on my phone.
Mhm.
You're thinking we're having quality time.
Right.
A week later, I'm like, we don't never spend time together. And you're like, what?
We were just together yesterday.
We were
sitting.
We sit every day. And I'm like, but we never have a conversation.
Right.
Like, you don't listen. And you know what? I think another thing too is when you are a good listener, you want to be able to provide a safe environment for someone to talk.
That's so important, and I think parents don't understand that. And I think we talked about that a little bit, because you know how your mother, like, son, you could come to me about anything.
Right.
It's an open communication, right? And they come to you like, oh my God, no, this didn't happen, stuff like that. They like, oh no, this is not safe. This is not an open communication, right? You didn't even listen. You blew up, and so sometimes you got to be calm when you on fire.
Wait, even how about this too? And I learned that, like, having all these cheerings, child. I remember, well, my 16-year-old says things just to kind of stir me up, but he never gets a stir out of me, like, never. And I remember one time he had his friends on like a FaceTime or whatever. It was like 5 of them, and I didn't know he said to them, "Watch this." Yeah, he said like a watch this with my mom. My mom never reacts to stuff, right? So he comes down. He's like, Mom, I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, what's up? And he starts telling me how, he's ready to have sex and he wants to get a tattoo. I mean, a slew of things
that would rile somebody else.
That I was like, and I was kind of tired too that day, and I was just like, oh, okay, son. And he was like, that's it. And I was like, well, you want me to get you some protection and he's just like, he starts smiling, just like,
this is a shame.
What's wrong with this lady? This lady's not, you know what I'm saying? And so it's an art form, because you want whoever you have close relationships with to be able to come to you and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So when he actually does come and say, blah, 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 you want him to be able to do that again.
Right.
Now, if I was like, we are Christians and you are not having sex and, blah, 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 I could have went there.
You ain't getting no tattoo, not staying up in here.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because
this is my house. You won't get no tattoo till you leave.
And you ain't having no sex.
I was just like, all right, son. I mean, what do you say? I'm not taking you to get no tattoo. I'm not signing for that. Right. So
I'm not giving you
what would be the reason for having an argument about it?
When it was just a conversation about what I'm thinking about.
And
I haven't done it
when
yet.
It's really in my power whether you get it or not. Because they can't, he's 16, they can't, you have to have written permission to get a tattoo, right? So it's in my power. There's no need to argue about that. Like, even I remember I was telling a parent the other day, their child kept saying how they wanted to buy a car, blah, blah, blah. And their child has a tendency to spend, their money quick, and every time they mentioned about the car, they would keep saying to them, well, if you quit eating up your money, they just kept saying smart remarks, right? And I was like, why don't you just say, okay, like, how are we going to do that? How are we going to save up for it? How much money do you need? What kind of car are we talking about? You know what I mean? That's that's listening, number one. But that's also offering wisdom. And now I'm communicating with you as opposed to attacking you when you said something.
Or communicating against you.
And so, yeah, I think that's major, when we talk about parents, but I think also for spouses as well. we often come with views on how we do things, even when it comes to a love language.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You might be someone who likes acts of service, right? But you might not want me to cook for you. You might want me to clean your car.
Right.
So it's a different act of service.
So what type of acts of service are pleasing to you? Will communicate my love to you, right?
Right.
That shows I'm listening when I start doing them.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
And now we're happy.
Yes.
All right, last thing, because we got to go.
Okay.
We talked about hearing the whole message. It says to do this, learn how to read people's body language and tone so that you can identify hidden nonverbal messages.
Okay.
Also, don't interrupt people or allow yourself to become distracted by your own thoughts or opinions. Instead, focus completely on what the other person is saying. Nod or say okay occasionally to acknowledge you're listening. If you don't understand something, wait for the other person to finish what he or she is saying before you ask for clarification.
Oh, no, see, I always ask for clarification in the middle.
Right, because you're like, I don't want to forget.
Well, no, I just be like, I want to understand the rest.
Okay, right.
You get what I'm saying? Because I'll be like, oh, wait, what does that mean? Before we keep going, because now I'm like,
so lost.
I don't know what that means. And now, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah. And then it's more. Above all, don't formulate a response until she or he has communicated their whole message. And avoid any judgment or criticism until it's your turn to speak. If you argue or play devil's advocate while you listen, you may discourage him or her from opening up to you.
Wow.
So you need to wait for the whole message before you make a judgment about what they're saying. Girl, we done speculated after the first 2 sentences.
Yeah.
We're not listening.
Wow.
Lastly, here's a tip.
Okay.
It can be difficult not to formulate a response while the person is talking. This is because we typically think much faster than other people can speak. So our brains are often wiring away while they are talking. You'll need to concentrate hard to stay focused on the person who's speaking, and this can take a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So it takes effort to communicate, effort to listen. So let me hear the whole story, because I've already made up what the issue is before you even finish the whole story. And that's how we formulate a response based on 5 sentences, what I said everything else. Because sometimes they'll say something, then they'll contradict it, and then they'll come back to it. But we haven't gotten to that. Like, yo, you contradicting yourself.
Right.
But they might fix it later.
Yeah.
And so that's really crazy. There's a different types of things, like we talk about empathic listening. And so maybe we can talk about that next.
Okay.
But for our Black business,
that was good.
I don't get transition, right? So we have 100% all natural antibacterial mouthwash. And who's this by?
So, if you're not a good listener, you might want to rinse your mouth out.
So crazy.
But no, this is Garnier's Garden. Or I think, is it Garnier's? It might be Garner's Garden. Okay. I say Garnier.
Put a little French on it.
Yeah. So Garner's Garden, and it's a fluoride-free oral care. 100% all natural antibacterial mouthwash.
Yes.
And you want to use this twice a day to make sure your breath don't stink.
Yes, and they also sell other products like soaps, oral care, hair products, deodorant, etc. The product you have is antibacterial mouthwash. We said that already. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Yes. And also, please put a comment. Like, we want to hear your comments. We want to know what you think and feel. I know some of y'all be texting us. Just put it in the comments.
Please.
We'll get it. We'll read it.
And it's good because then both of us will get it. And at work, we have to communicate it to other people.
Yes.
So tell me, what do you think listening is? How well do you listen? How well do you communicate?
Do you even listen at all?
And do you even communicate well? And what's an area of communication that you want to learn about?
Yeah.
That would be good.
All right. Well, we love you. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. God bless.
Bye.
Bye-bye.